All right, we'll make a start. I think there are one or two people still joining, but welcome. So good morning. My name's Jane Poor. I'm adoption consultant at CoramBAAF. Welcome to this briefing about the new adoption support plan. Particularly excited that this is our first session for IROs. I don't think we've ever done any specific training for IROs before. So it's really lovely to see you, and really glad that you're all able to join us this morning. I'm just going to run through a couple of housekeeping things. Those of you that are you going to flick through the slides, Elaine?
Yes.
So those of you that are familiar with us, CoramBAAF are a membership organisation. We cover 94% of all local authorities in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Isle of Man and Gibraltar and the Channel Islands are also our members. We are also publishers and publish guides, and we've got a lot of online resources that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. How it's going to work today is, if you could just make sure that you are muted, that would be very helpful to us so that we don't get to hear what is going on in your background. If you can keep your camera on, that is fine, although when the slides are up, we probably can't see you anyway. Because of the numbers, the chat is actually muted for during the presentation, but we will open it at the end later on, depending on how much time we've got at the end for you to put questions in there. If you have a technical emergency, Liam is here keeping everything afloat and doing all the tech, and you can message him if you need to. We are recording the presentation, but we won't be sharing anything that's put in the chat. So with no further delay, let me introduce you to Elaine Dibben. A lot of you will know her as my predecessor. She now works as a associate trainer for CoramBAAF. She's also chair of several panels and also undertakes pieces of consultancy across England. Elaine has been working on the adoption support plan and is going to run through it today for you. Hand over to Elaine. Welcome, Elaine.
Thank you very much, Jane, and welcome to everybody. Really, it's very exciting to know there are so many people that want to know about the form. Delighted. So we've got a presentation for you. So I just want to run through really some of the key objectives that were underpinning the development of the new support plan. We'll talk a bit about the development work that's informed the adoption support plan and the learning that we've had from the feedback that we had when we ran a pilot last year. And take you through a little bit of the structure of the adoption support plan. And then at the end, just I say suggestions. These are actually kind of things that we've gathered really from the agencies that have been involved in the pilot in terms of how they've thought about preparing their sort of teams and adopters for the introduction of the adoption support plan into the agency. And I'll also talk about the guidance as we go through. So without further ado, the adoption support plan. And I think we just want to kind of really emphasise what an important document the adoption support plan is. We see this as a really key document for the child and their adopters. I think historically, if you ask people about the most important document, people would probably think about the child permanence report, and that's absolutely right, because clearly the child permanence report holds all of the history for the child, really, and is also a document that, as an adopted adult, they can come back and have access to that form because it was information that's shared with their adopters at the time of placement and adoption. I think the adoption support plan has been a bit forgotten at points, really. So I think it's thought about at different points in the process, and then it's kind of been a bit forgotten. And we know that, having talked to adopters, that's the same for them. It's not a document that's necessarily had prominence for them, and I think we feel that it really agency is something that they need to see as another really key and important document for them to have access to and to make use of throughout the time of the child's sort of throughout the child's childhood, really, and thinking about it at points when they need help. So we're hoping that kind of the launch of this adoption support plan is really going to put this as a document on the map for everybody involved, really. Just to say that if you are placing children in a sibling group, then each child will have their own support plan, because that's obviously going to reflect their individual needs, but also can also reflect the needs of the two or three or more children as a sibling group. The other thing about the plan is it's a living document. It's a document that's going to kind of change over time because it will constantly need updating. So the first point at which people are going to be thinking about the child's adoption support needs will probably come when they're writing the child permanence report. But it will be reviewed again at the time that the child is being matched with a family. It will be looked at again when the child is being placed with that family. It will be looked at again through the points where that placement is being reviewed up until the point of the adoption order. And we hope it will continue to be a kind of a relevant document when families are then potentially needing to come back and seek additional support for themselves after the adoption order has been made. So, and I think just because this is a session particularly kind of we're wanting to kind of highlight issues for independent reviewing officers, I guess that one of the things that we wanted to kind of really be clear about is that the adoption support plan is a document that needs to be reviewed. That's set out in the adoption agency regulations, where it talks about the child's support needs being reviewed as part of the children in care reviews that are held up to the point of the adoption order. So that's why we felt it was really important to have a session specifically just to kind of highlight this for yourselves as IROs so that you were familiar with it and what we were trying to achieve. So at various points in time, as I say, when it's being updated, the draft adoption support plan will be probably being prepared at the point that social workers are preparing to bring a match to the adoption panel. At that point in time, it needs to be shared with the adopters so that they're also familiar with what's in the report and they have an opportunity to comment on it. Once the match has been agreed by the agency decision maker, then that draft adoption support plan will then become a sort of an approved plan. And what we hope is that the adoption support plan is going to be a document that adopters will continue to refer to when the child is living with them. So it's something that they can kind of have as an active document, looking back on it, seeing kind of who are the people that they might need to contact when particular issues come up for them. So it's going to be kind of seen as a signposting document, but also a document where they'll be able to see what kind of promises were being made really about the support that would be available to them. Some of the people who were involved in developing the form were based in adoption support teams, and they really thought about what information they would need to see in this report when families come forward to them asking for an assessment of support needs later on after the child's been adopted, when families come back seeking support. And one of the reasons that we, Adoption England and ourselves, felt that it was time to produce a new kind of standalone adoption support plan was continuing messages really that we particularly have received from the Adoption UK Barometer, where people were being asked about kind of adoption support and then specifically about the plan. So this was the Adoption Barometer, which is put out by Adoption UK, gets a good level of response from adopters. And in that report, adopters were asked if they had a written plan for adoption support, and only a third, so 32% of new adoptive parents said that they had a written plan for adoption support. Another 20 of them said they weren't sure if they had it. So I think kind of you can fairly well assume that they wouldn't know where it was or how to access it. That's concerning because 100% of adopters should have seen their adoption support plan, read it, commented on it and signed it as part of the paperwork that comes to the panel. So 25% of them said that they didn't see the support plan until after the child was placed with them. So again, kind of no opportunity for them to make comment on what was being proposed before the match was presented to panel and agreed by the decision maker. 8% of them said that they were only shown the plan when they were asked to see it. And when there were plans in place, the feedback was that there was considerable variation in what they contained. In terms of involvement, again, about a third, so just under a third, 28% of people said that their social worker had involved them in creating the plan. Another sort of almost third said that they weren't shown a draft version of the support plan or given an opportunity to ask questions or make any suggestions before the plan was given to them in its final form. So this was something that was, if you like, being imposed upon them rather than something that they'd had a part in contributing to. For those people who said that they had a plan, about half of them said they were somewhat happy with it, and about a third of them were very happy with it. The others reserved judgment. They felt it was too early to know whether this plan was actually going to meet their needs and the needs of their children. And that's kind of fair enough in a way, because I think what we'll see from a bit of feedback later on is that, and there's a real recognition that obviously, you know, at the point that we're initially kind of putting together an adoption support plan, we're trying to anticipate kind of what the issues might be for children and families when they're kind of joining together, but there are always the unknowns, and so that's again another reason why it's really important to review this plan. So the adoption support plan originally was developed back in 2015. At that point, there wasn't a document that was being kind of routinely used across all agencies in England and other parts of the UK. I think some agencies had kind of devised their own. I think a few had kind of used a sort of draft template that had been sent out in the past. So when we were thinking about developing adoption support plan, at that point, it seemed to make sense to us to incorporate it into the adoption placement report so that it would be part of the panel papers. And then our expectation, I guess, was it would continue to be used and reviewed once the adoption placement was made. I think in reality, what's happened is that that the adoption placement report is a report that doesn't have a lot of ongoing use once the placement's been made, and so the adoption support plan part of it has kind of got somewhat lost and forgotten about really by both social workers and adopters. So back in 2023, Adoption England started as part of their wider programme of looking at adoption support provisions, focused on thinking about kind of what an adoption support plan could look like. And that involved workers, social workers and managers who were involved in both matching and supporting prospective adopters, and as I say, some who were already working in adoption support services. So they started to pull together some thoughts about what would need to be in the plan and how they would want to implement it. They then came to CoramBAAF and we worked together with them to complete a pilot version of the adoption support plan. We've written guidance for the social workers who are completing the plan, for adopters so that they understand what this form is and what the purpose of it is. And also there's a short guidance for IROs. So the version, the adoption support plan was launched, I think, this week, Jane? Either or the end of last week. So it's now out there. I think it's Monday, in fact.
Monday,
so I think,
this week, yeah.
Yeah. So if you haven't seen it yet, do get in touch with probably your adoption team or your local RAA to find out how that's going to be sort of circulated and used across your agency. So yes, so this is sort of set out in regulation. So when an agency is considering a proposed placement for adoption, they must carry out an assessment of the needs of the child, the needs of the prospective adopters, and any children of the prospective adopters for adoption support services in accordance with the regulations under the Adoption Agency's regulations and the Adoption Act. What's interesting is there isn't, in some of the forms that we have to complete during adoption, there's a schedule that sort of sets out what needs to be included in those forms. We don't have that for an adoption support plan. So the plan that we've put together previously and the plan that we've now got now is a result of really sort of thinking about all the things that we need to know about the child, about their needs, and how we then kind of put that together with the adopters and their needs once your child is being placed with them. So we have kind of really tried to think about all the information that's needed by all the different parties that are going to be using this form. The other thing that the stat guidance sets out is that clearly part of thinking about adoption support needs has to include arrangements for future contact between the child and members of their birth family and other people who are important to them. So when we were looking at bringing together the new adoption support plan, there are a number of things that we wanted to achieve, really, and that's what we wanted to test out through the pilot that we completed. So obviously, we need to make sure that we're meeting the requirements of the Adoption Agency regulations, the Adoption Support Services regulations, which specifically deal with the issues around adoption support and meeting those needs, and adoption statutory guidance. The other thing that we've done, as I say, is to separate the adoption support plan from the adoption placement report. So it's now much more visible. So people will be able to see it and know what it is. It's a standalone document and it can continue to be used throughout the child's adoption journey. We wanted to make sure it was very much child focused. So part of the old plan, because it was fitting into another document, there was a grid it felt a bit tick boxy. We wanted to make sure that the adoption support plan gives a really clear representation of the child, who they are at the point that the support plan is being written, what their support needs are expected to be and projected to be, both sort of in the short term and in the longer term. But also to kind of look at holistically at the family that they're going to be joining, making sure that we're thinking about the children who are within the family. And we know from, perhaps some of the sort of case reviews that we've looked at that it's really important that we're aware of the needs of children within the adoptive family as well. And that there's also kind of really clear analysis from social workers about what the needs are and what the ongoing support needs are going to be. The other thing we needed to do was make sure that we've got all the information together in one report. So, I think you will see that there is some information in the adoption support plan that it will also be found in the child permanence report. That's because we need it to be a standalone document, and we need somebody to be able to, and again, a CPR, a child's permanence report, once the adopters have got the child with them, might not be something that they refer to kind of all the time, but if they're needing support, then they do need to be able to kind of reach out and get hold of this document. So there will be some information in here that you would be able to, or social workers will be able to bring across from a child permanence report. There might be other places like medical reports, there might be in some information that comes from court reports, but it's really important that this form brings everything together in the one report so that adopters can easily access it and make use of it going forward. We also recognise that we haven't previously thought about kind of some of the work that's gone on with adopters when they're being assessed as adopters and prior to kind of the match, where social workers doing those assessments think a lot about the strengths of the adopters, but also the potential vulnerabilities. And there hasn't previously been a way of incorporating that information into the adoption support plan. So we now have very specific reference to what the vulnerabilities were that were identified during the adopter's assessment, and ensures that we've then thought about kind of how we might need to address those in the context of the child that's joining their family, and the provision that's going to be available. We also wanted to make sure that adopters are going to be included in the development of the support plan, and that they feel confident in the support that's going to be on offer to them. So we've thought a bit about, with those involved in the pilot, really, about how we can make sure that that happens. And then also just to highlight that the adoption support plan is something that should be regularly reviewed before the adoption order is made. And that, and that will obviously be through the process of the child in care reviews, and will then inform assessments of adoption support needs after the adoption order. So those were the things that we were trying to achieve. Very grateful to all of the RAAs who were involved with the pilot. So we had Adoption West based down in the Bristol and north or southwest area. We had Adopt London North. We had Aspire Adoption. Adopt Thames Valley and Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, who joined a little bit later on in the pilot. So all of them were involved in the pilot from sort of April through till September, apart from Cambridgeshire, who joined a bit later. And they did it in various ways. So some of them, I think, started to use it wholesale across all the placements that they were making at the time. Others were kind of picking, particularly where they were working with a number of different local authorities, perhaps decided to focus it more on matches that were coming from particular local authorities initially, so that they could work more sort of directly with the social workers that would be involved. And then we received feedback from various people who'd been involved in the pilot at the end that's been helpful to us in just thinking about any tweaks that we needed to make to the form. And I have to say it was quite reassuring, really, that there weren't any kind of very major changes that we need to make. So it was kind of very much kind of just tweaking things. We've also, during this process, worked very closely with Adoption UK, and I met with a group of adopters who previously adopted in the last 7 years, who were shown the report and asked for their views on how they felt they could be more included in the adoption support plans. And we've also kind of shared it with various stakeholder groups. So hopefully a lot of people out in the sector have known that this work is happening, but inevitably I guess there are still some that are kind of coming to hear about it now. As I said earlier, we've also written 3 sets of guidance to go with the adoption support plan. So guidance for social workers, guidance for the adopters, and guidance for IROs. It is really important, especially because this is a new form and people won't be familiar with it. It's really important that those that are using the forms or being given the forms are also given the guidance. And I think that we did pick that up from the feedback, that sometimes we had adopters who kind of fed back on the form but hadn't necessarily seen the guidance. We certainly had IROs who hadn't seen the guidance when they were giving some feedback. So the guidance is, I mean, it's, you know, it's not going to be needed forever, but certainly for new workers that are using the form, and certainly for adopters who will need to understand what this form is and the relevance for them, it's important that that guidance comes alongside the form when it's being handed out. So we've basically got 5 areas that we cover in the support plan. The first bit is very factual. It just gives all the contact details of all the people that are going to be involved in the child being placed with the family and supporting the family going forward. The first key part really is all about the child. So what we cover in there are a number of kind of, I guess, what you'd expect to see, really. And we have sort of divided it into sections. So we've got a section looking at understanding the child's experiences. Again, some of that information will come over from the child's permanence report because it will be setting out some of their history, but very specifically thinking about kind of what that then means for the child and their support needs going forward. We ask about things like how the child's been prepared for understanding kind of why they're being placed for adoption and for moving into their new family. There's a section looking at the child's emotional and behavioural development. Again, sort of setting out what we know now, what support's already in place, and then what support is anticipated that will be needed once the child's moved into their new family. And within that, people are encouraged to, again, give kind of practical details of who might be the people that need to be involved. So if you've got health professionals, educational professionals, virtual schools, whoever might be involved, if we've got contact details that are relevant at this point in time, people are encouraged to use those. There's a whole section, obviously, on health and medical information, on education, on the child's identity and understanding of their past. And then there's a whole section around the arrangements for the child to stay connected with their family members and the people that are important to them. And we've tried within that to kind of just reflect some of the changing thinking, really. So we do kind of have an expectation that adopters will be meeting the birth family members, and there's a reason not to. We do kind of start off with an expectation that photographs would be included in any indirect contact unless there's a reason not to. And we do start off with kind of an expectation that that face-to-face meetings has been thought about. And again, it may not be appropriate, but at least trying to encourage people to make sure that those conversations have been had. We then have a section on the adopters and their support. And this is the bit where we think about the vulnerabilities that were identified during their assessment. we think about the informal support networks that they have, and we know that these are really important to adopters. So it's their friends, their family, the links that they've started to make within other people within the adoption community. We know that these things can change, but we also know that some of these people will be people that the adopters will very much rely upon. And we want adopters to kind of think about the support that's going to be available to them from all the different kind of places where it might come from. So we look at that with them. We also then set out, obviously, what the agency support's going to be. And there are core services that we would expect to be provided to everybody. And then we move on to think about more therapeutic support that might be needed and may need to be kind of accessed through Adoption Support Fund or other kind of means that are identified. We've then got a separate section for support to the birth family. And again, we've just set out quite clearly what the core services should involve that are set out in the adoption guidance. That's a section that can be detached and therefore just shared with the birth family members themselves. And then we have what's a very new section, really, which is kind of a section that we envisage will be able to inform the child in care reviews. So it's a review of the adoption support plan. It goes through all of the different sections of the plan and asks social workers to update them before the review, and then also to come back to the report afterwards and update them with any changes that have been made as a result of discussions in the review and any kind of actions that need to be taken forward. So again, this is a living document. This is a document that will continue to be updated and used by adopters as they move forward through the journey. What's different for those people who do remember the adoption support plan that was tucked away in the adoption placement report is that we really kind of looked at descriptive summaries of needs. So tick boxes don't tell you an awful lot. People try to squeeze a lot of information into a tiny box. So we're now really asking people to kind of set out really clearly kind of what the identified needs are of the child, to think about what support's going to be needed, who's going to provide that support, give details of kind of timescales, and also kind of where appropriate, think about kind of where those support needs are going to be reviewed. So particularly, for example, when we're thinking about keeping in touch plans, we know that those things will also again change over time. So kind of setting out kind of a clear expectation of kind of how that information and how those plans are going to be reviewed over time. As I say, I think that we're much more clear really in this report about exploring how much the child understands about their life story, what's happened to them so far, and also kind of then what's planned for the future and their understanding of what adoption is going to mean for them. We've acknowledged the kind of vulnerabilities of adopters as well as alongside the support. And then we've got these two separate sections for birth family and for the reviewing process. So I think the feedback from social workers was they were worried that adopters wouldn't know what all these forms are and what they were for. And I have to say, I think some social workers were a bit confused about them as well, really. So this is a template that's set out in the adopter's guide, just to try and help them understand where this fits. Where does the adoption support plan fit? So we've got the child permanence report, which is written during care proceedings and then updated when the child match goes to the panel. We've got an adoption placement report, which is prepared specifically for the adoption panel that's looking at the match for the child. And that looks at how what the child's needs are now and how they're going to be met by the proposed adoptive family. So really important in terms of kind of deciding whether or not this is the appropriate match. We have this support plan, which is also prepared for the panel. It's agreed at the placement planning meeting, but it's a document that will continue. So it will continue to be updated after the childcare reviews, and adopters can continue to use it when they come back to ask for adoption support. And then the adoption placement plan, which is prepared for the placement planning meeting and deals very much with kind of the placement itself. So plans for introductions, transitions, and all the notifications of child moving into a new family. So of those four forms, the ones that adopters will kind of keep and want to kind of continue to use will be the child's permanence report, setting out the child's history, and the adoption support plan, which will be, as I say, updated and ongoingly thinking about the child's and their support needs. So The adopter's guide, again, is written to the adopters in the sort of first person, and it's really encouraging them to see the adoption support plan that is something for them. So it explains what the plan is. It talks about how the plan is put together. It highlights that their views on the support being proposed is going to be sought before the matching panel, and there's a space in the adoption placement report where the adopters' views on the support and on contact are asked for and recorded so that that's seen by the panel. It explains the purpose of the placement planning meeting, and then it explains to adopters what the statutory review process is. So it's really important that they understand kind of the reviewing process, really, and that this is something, this is obviously somewhere where they can kind of come and kind of just highlight if they think that there are areas that aren't working for them, where they feel that they need additional support. And obviously that's something that you as reviewing officers will be exploring during the process of the review. And again, just explaining to them the importance of the adoption support plan when they come back and ask support from the adoption support teams. It may be, depending on what level of support they're needing post-adoption, it may be that the adoption support plan will be used as the basis for a new assessment of their adoption support needs, and then there will be a new adoption support plan. So that could be where there are more kind of sort of high-level needs, specific needs. But for some families, this might just be the only support plan that they need, certainly for much of the earlier kind of time that the child's with them. The guide for social workers, again, kind of explains what the adoption support plan is, but there's a few things that it particularly asks social workers to think about. So one is who should be the lead social worker or lead worker that's coordinating the completion of the adoption support plan. In some RAAs, it seems to be the family finding social worker who's either based within the RAA service or based within one of the local authorities. In others agencies, it seemed to be the childcare social worker. Whoever it is, it's just important that they hold that overall responsibility for making sure that all aspects of this form are pulled together. And it's particularly important to be clear about that when you're making interagency placements with a voluntary adoption agency. We've also asked people to think about kind of the process of pulling an adoption support plan together. Some agencies, and I guess we would see this as best practice, have actually put in place an adoption support planning meeting. So that's a specific meeting where the draft plan is being agreed before the match goes to panel. It's a meeting that can involve the prospective adopters. It will involve their adoption worker, as long as the childcare worker and potentially family finding worker. And in some agencies, certainly there would be at least consultation with the adoption support team to make sure that they're also involved and aware of what commitments are being made. I know that there's an awful lot of work that's being done at the point that matches are coming to panel, and for some people the thought of yet another meeting might be too much. I think that other agencies have thought about how they can perhaps incorporate that into a linking meeting or a matching meeting. But if those are meetings that don't include the prospective adopters, then you do need to think about how their views are contributing into the thoughts about what's going to be needed in terms of provisions going forward. And again, we just kind of highlight the importance for social workers of completing the review of the support plan prior to the reviews and afterwards, so it maintains that kind of sort of sense as being a whole document and a living document. And there is a small guide for yourselves as IROs. Really, it's kind of it's basically kind of telling you all that you already know, really, which is about kind of why we hold childcare reviews. But I guess I suppose just recognising the difference between reviewing a child who's placed for adoption to children who are being looked after generally, recognising that adopters have a role in this review, that they have delegated PR, and that PR is expected to kind of, in a sense, increase over time, really, so that their views about kind of how things are going, about the support that they need to have some kind of degree of prominence within the discussions in the review. And I think just kind of acknowledging that I don't know, well, certainly some of the feedback from doctors seems to suggest that they haven't kind of been aware of the adoption support plan being reviewed as part of the child in care review. And so I guess that's why we think it's particularly important just to highlight the importance of this particular form, and why we're hoping that within the context of the reviews that you hold, you're able to kind of give this some prominence and be able to kind of encourage its ongoing use. So as I say, we had feedback from the pilot, recognising that this was quite a big new initiative really for social workers. So we had good feedback, and we had some kind of again, because I think at the point that it was doing it, so quite a few of the social workers who were providing feedback had only maybe used the form once or twice, so they were still getting used to it. It was new for them, they weren't sure about it. One of the concerns that were being raised was around the fact that there was some duplicated information in both the adoption placement report and then the adoption support plan, and that's because we hadn't at that point made any changes to the adoption placement report. So some people said that they thought that the APR was now redundant and that we just didn't need to use it at all, which rather negates the kind of purpose of it as a matching document. So, but I think what we do recognise is it's a document that's time limited really. So it is really important that adoption placement report demonstrates why this is the suitable match for the child. But once that matching panel and the agency decision has been made, it's not a form that needs to continue to be used, which is why we've now removed the adoption support plan from it. There was also some concern about whether adopters really understood the report, and one social worker talked about adopters being overwhelmed with all the different paperwork that they were reading at the time. And I think, you know, we can see again there's some truth in that probably, and that again was the purpose of kind of setting up a guide specifically for adopters to explain to them what the adoption support plan is, so that they had an understanding of what its relevance was going to be for them over time. They also talked about the additional time that was going to be needed in completing the form, and particularly perhaps where it's a childcare social worker who was having to update the CPR as well. And we have to just acknowledge that really, I think, but not necessarily make apologies for it, because again, as I say, if we think it's important that the adoption support plan is a document that is a sort of standalone document, it has to have all the relevant information into it. So we have tried to remove duplication where we can, but we still feel it's important that this adoption support plan can be seen as a standalone document by the adopters and indeed by adoption support teams that get involved with them later on. One family finding team liked the support plan being separate, but said they preferred the grid format, but that was not a view that was shared by others. We also got, and this was really nice to read, was we got some very positive feedback from some social workers, which I think really captures the essence of what we think this is about, which is why I've kind of included these. So I really like the new support plan. It gives a good comprehensive overview of the child. It's much more friendly and child-centred. I look forward to using it again in the future. It's a positive change. Another one says it's much easier to work from. I like they're very much part of the reviewing process. It feels more user-friendly than the grid in the previous document, which was very repetitive, and it feels much more likely to be used by adopters in the future. And then another one, that plan feels like a much easier document to complete if the work to complete it has been done. I think once people have this much more in mind when in their child information sessions, medical advisor meetings, and discussions with the doctor ahead of and during the linking, they will become much easier to complete. And there's no doubt, like everything, you know, kind of when something's new, it all feels a bit much. And once you get used to it, you kind of get much more familiar, and it's much easier to kind of complete. We had very limited feedback from IROs, and I think part of that was probably because some of the cases that had been where this form had been used hadn't got to the point of being reviewed by the end of the pilot. So we only had a couple of feedbacks from IROs, but I think as we're kind of talking to you as a group of IROs, it felt important to just highlight them. And I think what they had picked up, I guess, was some of that, some of the kind of issues for the social workers. So they were kind of noting the kind of potential duplication that there was in these things like the APR and the CPR, but also kind of with current documentation that was being used for the reviews. So they were talking about kind of the care plan and the social worker reports that are being prepared for reviews, and how that was also duplicating information that was then being provided in the review of the adoption support plan. And that, I think, is maybe something that people are going to need to think about as they go forward. They felt that the form was very long, and again, they felt, again, it was kind of saw it as being repetitive. And one IRO said that they felt that families had accepted the support plan, but social workers were struggling and recognising we're all time short. So I think that reviewing officers, certainly in that early part of the pilot, have been kind of picking up some of the kind of positives and negatives really that were seen through the pilot. The feedback we got from adopters was overwhelmingly positive, which was really reassuring. So the majority of the adopters all felt the objectives were met. They felt that the guide where they'd seen it was helpful. They didn't make any suggestions for changes. And what was interesting, we had some adopters who were adopting for a second time, so they were able to comment on the differences. So one said, we adopted more than one child. Our children's support plans were very different. We know of another family who seemed to not have such detailed plans. I think this format was different to ours. It would be great if all formats were the same. I've gone back and thought about the process I had with my other child. I've not needed the adoption support fund, but did not clearly remember the support bit. This was much more important for my next child, and I like that it's separate. Interestingly, they all, the adopters that commented, all kind of picked up on the review of the adoption support plan. So one said we're not at the final bit yet, the adoption order, but the review has happened through meetings and discussions. We like this format. It's reviewed before we got our order. It's been regularly reviewed, which worked well for us as we kept having new information to deal with. Another one said we were made to concentrate on small stuff too. I would say the agency must review it. It's constantly out of date. And can it be highlighted that we as adoptive parents can ask for additional reviews? And we do indeed highlight that in the guidance because it comes from adoption statutory regulations. And another one said, review, review, review. It always changes. This has been so helpful. Give regular advice to social workers for reviewing. It's worked well. So I think there's a definite kind of message there from adopters of how important it is that despite all the thought that goes into the adoption support plan when we're putting it together prior to the match, things are going to change once the child moves in and joins the family. Things are going to change for the family as well. And then there are going to be a lot of unknowns. So that's the importance really of the adoption support needs being reviewed. Had a couple of panels that gave feedback, again, both of them very positive. Comments about kind of bring the child more to life and feeling that some of the earlier issues around duplication were starting to be resolved. And the only real kind of changes that we made is we've reduced the information needed in the adoption placement report. So that's kind of hopefully less duplication now with the adoption support plan. We put some additional information and prompts in around financial support as part of the support that was being identified. And we've also put some additional information in to cover transition of services for children where children with disabilities are being placed. We took out a couple of bits that were duplicating information that was going to be in the new CPR, and we've improved the sort of formats in the guidance. So I think we're really happy now with kind of the end result. Just in terms of other CoramBAAF forms, so the APR, there's an APR 2025, which has been adapted for you to use if you're using the adoption support plan. For any agencies that are not using the adoption support plan, and that will include other countries such as sort of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, they can continue to use the APR 2018 because that will cover the things that they need. The new CPR is being published next month in March, and workers started on a new PAR, which will be published next year, at which point there will be a final version of the APR. Jane might want to say more about that at the end. And then just kind of, I suppose, some thoughts and ideas really about introducing the adoption support plan into your agencies. We would ask you to think about kind of where the adoption support plans are put together. Could you introduce an adoption support plan meeting into your processes? And if not, how are you going to make sure that you involve adopters in planning for adoption support and what's going to be available to them going forward? It's really important that they feel that support's going to be in place for them and will hold them kind of when the unexpected things come up. I think for what's worked well for those agencies involved in the pilots was holding some briefings with childcare and adoption teams that were going to be involved, panel members, IROs and adoption support teams, so that everybody's familiar with the new form that's being introduced. They understand why it's important and are able to kind of sign up and support it through the initial potential teething problems that you're likely to have. And I think in thinking about that, just kind of really highlighting why we feel that there are long-term benefits to having this standalone adoption support plan, and that has been very much welcomed by the adopters that we've had feedback from. I think just to acknowledge and allow additional time for workers to become familiar with the new form. And as and when we've got templates of exemplars that perhaps where good forms have been kind of rated as good by adoption panels or by managers, to start to put together some exemplars that sort of social workers that perhaps newer or less confident about can have a look at. Plan your start date for when you're going to introduce the form once those briefings or training have been completed. And then I think for you as reviewing officers, and obviously for the local authorities involved, I suppose it is just having a look really at kind of what's going to come as part of the adoption support plan, and particularly in terms of that review of adoption support needs, and think about whether there are ways that can be fitted into the paperwork that's needed for reviews that your agency uses without creating further duplication. Okay, and there are contact details there for Jane and myself. Jane, can I just, we do a thank you, but Jane, is there anything that you want to add to that?
Elaine, yeah, that's really helpful. I think we are just going to open the chat for a few minutes. So if you have got any comments or questions that you want to put in the chat, just post them in there now, and we will do our best to pick them up. There is quite a lot of you, but we will try to do that. I think that's a really good introduction, Elaine. I think the only thing for me that I will pick up is this thing about there being two APRs, because I have had a query about that. So if you're using the adoption support plan, the new one, you need to use the new APR, which is the 2025. If you're not using the new ASP and agency might be using one of their own or something else, then carry on using the 2018 version. We will put them both together at some point. As Elaine said, we're just about to launch the updated CPR as well, which fits very nicely alongside the ASP, and the PAR is being updated. We'll then do the APR, and then we'll start all over again and look at look at how they fit together as a whole as well. Somebody's put in the chat, should this be the document we review at adoption placement reviews rather than our own agency care plan with adoption?
I guess you just want to check that it covers everything that you would include in your review, but I think it certainly covers everything in relation to adoption support and adoption support needs. There might be some bits in your own documentation that you would want to keep. So I think we would like this to be the main kind of document that's being reviewed when you're thinking about the support needs and around kind of contact and things, but there may be other bits that you need to keep from your own reports as well. So I guess you're going to want to, in an individual day basis, kind of just have a look at what you're using at the moment and think about that.
Yeah, so I think that's right, Elaine, because somebody else has put in there. Carmen's put, it sounds, oh, it's just moved, lost it. It sounds to me like both need reviewing, which hints at the duplication. Yeah. Because if agencies have their own forms, a lot of what's in them may well be covered in the ASP now. So you may want to just review which one.
And it may just be that, you know, it sounds basic, doesn't it? But it may just be people in that section just put see adoption support plan, and then you won't need to kind of worry about filling in two bits of a form.
Yeah, so Nikki has put in the chat, thank you, would really like to understand more, need to go over this again. Are there any good links to read over in our own time? So this briefing is being recorded, so you will be able to access it. All the IRO guides and the social work guides and the form itself will have been sent to whoever is the link person for CoramBAAF in your agency. And I know that's been a bit of an issue for some people. We've had quite a few people saying, oh, I haven't had it, but you have to work out, if you don't know who that link person is, then you'll have to contact our either our membership team or our forms team, and they'll tell you who has been sent the link for the downloads.
I mean, it's probably a safe bet to say, in the first instance, contact the adoption support, the adoption manager in your local RAA, because if they aren't the person, they should know who he is, I guess.
So I think that's it in the chat for the moment. I think university, there is an acknowledgement that it is a bit more work. We know it's more work, but actually this is the document that adopters will and families will still be looking at when their children are teenagers. And this is the one that they'll come back to when they're 14, 15, 16, when we've all gone off into the sunset somewhere. So we need to make sure it's right for them, really. And I think we don't really apologize for the extra work. It's the same with the CPR. The CPR is slightly more of a collaborative process and is more work, is more comprehensive, but we realize that that's what our children need going forward. Thank you to a couple of those who are leaving. Liam has put a link in the chat there to the introduction to the forms. Carmen has said, were IROs involved or contribute to the writing of the guidance? I'm mindful that only two were involved. No, there's only two who gave feedback. Carmen.
Only two who gave, there's only two who gave feedback. And I guess this is one of the difficulties and why we're really delighted that we've been able to hold this particular event and that a number of you have come to this, because I think a lot of the kind of communication that we have with around adoption is obviously with the regional adoption agencies, and so we're really aware that the conversations about what happens after that child is placed and the use of the importance really of those kind of child in care reviews is key, really, in terms of kind of keeping this up to date. So we didn't have any direct access to IROs. To be honest, the guidance, I think for most of you, the guidance doesn't tell you anything more than you already know, really, which is about kind of the importance of kind of reviewing the support plan, the sort of visits that would be expected, particularly in those early days of placement, and the purpose of the review and what needs to be covered in that. So it's really just sort of extracting and setting out kind of the legislation. I think it's then kind of over to you really to make sure that you're seeing this document, that you feel that it is being kind of updated and that you're getting the kind of information that you need, because one of the things that you need to do during the child in care reviews is think about kind of what the arrangements are for adoption support services, whether there's any need to reassess those needs, and similarly kind of what the arrangements are for meeting child's health and educational needs. So all of those, and contacts, so all of those things that are set out in the adoption agency regulations as things that you need to consider within the review should be included within the adoption support plan. And that's why hopefully, I think when you start to see these, then you will feel that they're helpful documents to you as well in the purpose of your reviews.
Obviously, if there is some feedback and we're all getting repeat feedback about one particular issue, then we will look at it. And the beauty of digital downloads is that we can tweak things. So, you know, once it goes out across the board, if there's unanimous feedback that one particular question, for example, is not working, then we can revisit it. Amy has said, can we get the slides? Liam has replied saying that the slides will be sent out to you.
And I guess what I would say is, yes, I mean, the slides, very happy for you to then use these slides as the basis of your briefings and training. So that's kind of what it's there for, really. So hopefully that means you don't have to sort of then put together anything different except a bit about how you're going to do it.
Yeah.
I think a couple of people have asked about kind of sharing a completed one. I'm afraid we can't do that. And I think it's really important that that's kind of owned by your agencies, really. So certainly for that, I mean, obviously, you'll need time for people to kind of get used to it. But I think it hopefully won't be too long before within your agencies it's recognised. There are some ones that been completed and taken to panel that seem to be good, and that can then start to be shared with kind of workers within the agency.
There's well, I don't know if that's a comment or a query in the panel from Joanne. We're wondering how our authority will be implementing this. We are Worcestershire and covered by ACE. We can't answer that for you. I'm afraid you have to go and ask them.
I think what I would say is, I mean, Adoption England, as I say, has worked very closely with this. I know that obviously they're the kind of overseeing sort of body for the RAAs. They have shared with the RAAs kind of the progress of the pilot, and that all RAAs will be aware. I think that this new form has now been developed and has been published. So I guess it's important that you kind of make contact with the RAAs and find out how they're intending to implement it.
I think that's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time, everybody. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear feedback from you, because I think, I mean, and I think, to be fair, the fact that we only got 2 feedbacks from an IRO isn't, I think was kind of just because IROs are very busy, and a social worker sending them feedback forms and saying, will you fill this out, was probably just felt like another task too much, really. So
it's also the length of the pilot as well, Elaine, because
and the length of the pilot
short of doing an 18-month pilot, you're not going to get them all through to review stage, are you? So
so it's an ongoing, it's that's in a sense still a work in progress. But if you've got particular sort of thoughts or comments, as I say, you've got my email and Jane's email on the presentation, so we're happy to hear from you.
Somebody there says, thank you, nice to see you, Elaine. I was your vice chair for some time when you chaired Bristol panel many years ago.
Oh my goodness, now my past is coming back to revisit me. How lovely to see you.
So thank you all very much for joining. There is a session for social workers and everyone else at lunchtime today, and then there's a repeat of that session tomorrow as well. This is the only one for IROs specifically, but obviously others can join the other sessions if they want.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of focused a bit on, specifically on your role, but I think, if you've got colleagues that you think would be kind of find this useful, then do encourage them to join the other 2 sessions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.